Okay, so for the sake of time, I know people are still going to be joining in the next minute or so, but we are going to get started. So hello, everyone, and welcome to the Business Council on Climate Change's webinar on applying behavioral change thinking for successful employee engagement. My name is Leah Papazoglou. I'm the Director of Employee Engagement at the Business Council on Climate Change, and I'm going to be your moderator and host for today. Before we officially get started, I want to go over a couple housekeeping things with you all. Some of you have already discovered the chat box, and that's great. That is definitely a place where you can add comments or feedbacks or connect with each other as we go through the webinar. And we will be checking that later after the webinar, but if you want to talk to us at BC3 and submit a question for the panel, we ask that you use the Q&A box. So Maura, my colleague Maura is here. She's going to be monitoring the Q&A box and pulling out questions for the panelists at the end of the webinar. And also if you have questions for BC3, specifically Maura can of course answer those on behalf of BC3 as she is the executive director. So again, just to recap, the chat box is there for you to use and connect with each other, offer insight or feedback to some of the things you're thinking of. But if you want to submit a question to the panelists or to BC3, please use that Q&A box. And then also worth noting that this webinar is being recorded. So please take note of that, and we will make sure to share that with you as a follow-up to this webinar. So let's get started. We have a pretty simple agenda, but it's very full. We're going to have a presentation on behavioral change from Chris Jones in a moment, and followed by a very lively panel discussion with these sustainability leaders. We're going to do our absolute best to keep this in our time frame. There's so much to dig into. So with that being said, we're going to get started. And please note, we're trying to leave 5 or 10 minutes at the end, ideally 10 minutes for some Q&A. So again, if you have questions during, submit them there, and hopefully we'll get to them at the end. So for those of you who are new to BC3 and new to our network, the Business Council on Climate Change, sometimes we say BC3, is a membership-driven nonprofit organization of sustainability leaders implementing and championing tangible climate action. So you can see our incredible network of members here. We're based in the Bay Area, and we're working in partnership with the City of San Francisco, and our organization serves as a platform to share climate change programs and incubate collaborative multi-sector engagement, while also providing a model to replicate our work. So we are a connector. We're bringing all these folks together to work together in climate action. Last year, we started work on a pilot employee engagement program. So that's what I've been up to. And we launched this pilot program in January of 2020. And we're excited to host this panel and continue the exciting conversation with our members and extend a network regarding this topic. So here are the folks that are probably your floating heads in the toolbar. And I want to take a moment to introduce them quickly, but also please note we're going to be getting to Katie and Dana at the second half of this webinar as panelists. And the first 20 minutes are really for Chris to set the stage and get us in the mindset to talk about behavior change and how this applies to our work. So Katie and Dana, I apologize, but I will get to your introductions in a bit, so hold tight. And for now, we're going to hear from Chris, who, as I mentioned, is a behavior change expert and director at the CoolClimate Network at UC Berkeley, and co-chair of the Behavior, Energy, and Climate Change Conference. If you've never heard of that before, you're going to hear more about it in a moment. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris now, who's going to give us an overview of behavior change, crash course, and then we'll move to our panel discussion. So Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I think I need to stop sharing to do that. So
wonderful.
Take it away.
Thank you. So good to be here. I'm going to be sharing my screen here in just a second. Let me know if you can see that. How's that? All right, thumbs up. Well, thank you again for letting me give this brief presentation. I've titled it Engaging Individuals and Organizations in Climate Action. We're going to be talking about more on the basis of strategies than theory. I've left the theory out of this. As Leah mentioned, I did teach a course on this for a few years at Berkeley, and we're just going to get right to the heart of engaging employees. And first, I'm going to start out with Just a quick overview at CoolClimate Network, what we are, we're a research consortium at UC Berkeley. We have a lot of members. We do research on carbon footprint analysis, behavior change programs. We develop software, and we run a statewide behavior change program. So I'm also co-chair of the Behavior, Energy, and Climate Change Conference. I highly recommend this conference if you're interested at all in behavior and particularly employee engagement. Many people think BECC is like their favorite conference. I think, Leah, I've heard you maybe say that before. It's a really wonderful conference. Not only do you get a lot of information on how to encourage behavior change and sustainability with a focus on sustainability, but also it's a wonderful network to be involved with. So I'd like to organize this talk around different spheres of influence that we all have in order to engage climate change. This is also the way we organize all of our programs and policies at CoolClimate. We start at the individual scale, but also moving up to your interpersonal, that'd be your peer networks, at your place of work, your organizations, community, and through public policy. So I'm going to start with the individual scale here, because that's what is it's kind of where people first engage often with climate change. When you become aware of the challenge of climate change, you start to think, well, what can I do individually to change my own behavior? So it's kind of a way to get your foot in the door in many cases. So let's talk about that for a minute. This is the carbon footprint of the typical US household. So if we take all emissions in the US economy and we allocate those to consumers, it looks something like this. This slide is a bit outdated now. Thankfully, they've gone down about 15% since I first did this slide back in 2005. But one thing you'll notice here is that the vast majority of our carbon footprint is embedded in the goods and services that we buy. So there's direct emissions from your vehicles and from your natural gas, but it's everything that we do. Every dollar that we spend leads to emission of greenhouse gases. And just to put this in perspective, this is the US carbon footprint. This is roughly the global carbon footprint. Actually, food is 40% of the carbon footprint, not 20 as it's showing here. But just to put things in scale. Now, if we finally achieve this level of greenhouse gas emissions, which is essentially our target for 2050, we will have only reached the current global level. Globally, we need to reduce emissions 80% below that by roughly mid-century in order to stabilize the climate. So just putting things in perspective. Now, carbon footprints vary really dramatically based on location and some basic demographic information, which I'm going to go over briefly. So here's the carbon footprint in California. A lot more on transportation and less on energy. You'll notice that electricity is only 5% of the carbon footprint of typical households in California. And when I ask people what percentage they think it is, I get 40, 60, 70, 80%. I mean, because we hear a lot about reducing emissions from electricity. In fact, it's very small. In the Bay Area, it's only 2%. And in the East Bay, where I work, it's only 1% of your carbon footprint. And in fact, if you have completely zero electricity, because you're signed up through a CCA and Community Choice Energy, and you believe that those are actually zero carbon, then that's zero. Not true, though, if you live somewhere else in the US. So if you lived in the Midwest or many other parts of the United States where coal-based electricity, that variable could be the largest part of your carbon footprint. So depending on where you live, you get very different profiles of not just your footprint, but what meaningful actions you can take and how much benefit you'll get from them. Carbon footprints vary really dramatically, not only between large locations like states, but also within communities. So our research looks at carbon footprints at fine spatial resolution. Here we're doing essentially neighborhood scale of the East Bay and San Francisco. And you'll see the large 5x difference between the lowest carbon footprint neighborhoods and the highest carbon footprint neighborhoods. And it's not just the size, but it's also the composition of those carbon footprints. So if you live way out in the suburbs, you can imagine a lot more emissions from transportation, but also from your larger homes, more stuff that you're buying. Whereas if you live in the urban core area, food could be a much larger part of your carbon footprint and less for transportation. So you don't want to give kind of generalized recommendations. You really want to give people targeted recommendations, and that's very important. Just going to boil this down a little bit. Here are some examples from San Francisco of some of the underlying data in our models. You can look at vehicle ownership. You see it's very low down in the financial district in San Francisco. Population density is very high. Different household size. You'll notice that larger families tend to live kind of in the southern part of the city. and income is also a driver. There are some 30 different variables in our model, but we kind of put those together for transportation. This is kind of what you get, kind of what you'd expect. And the red here means higher than average statewide. So there are neighborhoods in San Francisco even that are have more emissions from transportation just than the state, but overall it's very low. You can see the whole Bay Area. You can go to coolclimate.org/scenarios, and you can kind of scroll around these maps and kind of zoom into your neighborhood. So I just want to talk about our models for a few more minutes. And one thing that's important to consider is that these are some of our independent variables in our model, but different demographic factors affect carbon footprints differently. And those also relate to policy and behavior as well. So here we're looking at, I've sorted this table by different drivers of carbon footprints. And here I've sorted by household size. What you'll notice is that with household size, the aspects of carbon footprint that are most affected by household size are things you might expect. Food, clothing, transportation, more people you gotta feed and clothe. So what this means here is a 1% increase in the number of people in the house leads to almost a 0.5% increase in the amount of food that you buy. You'll notice that income has very little effect on how much people spend on food, even less effect, essentially no effect on how much food they actually buy. If you look at income, overall the effect is about 2.5 percent per 1% change. In other words, it's not a huge effect. When you have more income, you do spend more on consumption, but it's not as large as you might think. However, if you have a larger home, the stuff you've got to put in your home, the services perhaps that you buy for your home, the more energy obviously you're using for your home. If you own the home, you're not going to buy floor coverings or major appliances if you don't own that home. That's a factor. As well as, now this one is very surprising, your level of education. If you have a college degree, controlling for all these other factors, you might think that people, oh, well, they're more educated, maybe they're more concerned about climate change, they use less energy. No. More educated people on average will spend more on items associated with social status, traveling more, eating out more, entertainment. Lots of consumption is related, positively correlated with income and controlling for these other variables, as well as you might expect vehicle ownership, and you could, affect transportation. So when you put all this together, and because we know all these data at fine spatial resolution, we can plot them and estimate carbon footprints across the entire United States. Here we've done maps for zip codes, and you can kind of drill into metropolitan areas in these maps and see these big differences between low carbon footprint urban cores and high carbon footprint suburbs. You can also go and use these tools, this information to develop tools. So this is the CoolClimate calculator. If you want to understand your own personal carbon footprint and how it compares to people like you, then this is a good tool to use. It's a free tool available at coolclimate.org. So you can put in your location. Well, it starts with the US when you open it, and then you put in, say, California, and it looks very different. And you might put in Berkeley or Albany or a zip code in Albany. These carbon footprints change really dramatically depending on where you are. And then you could adjust the household size. So if you have a lot of people in your home and low income, food is going to be a much larger part of your carbon footprint than many other aspects of your carbon footprint. It might be the highest source of emissions. However, if you have high income and only one person in the household, food is going to be a very low part of your carbon footprint. So it's important to get a fair kind of comparison, somebody like me. That comparative feedback is really useful, not just what can people do, but what can I do, and how do I compare to people like me to know how well I'm doing? Because that's a fair comparison, right? So what you can do is go and use this tool and say, well, what could I do to reduce my carbon footprint to say 40% below my current level? So you can go through and adjust, buy an electric vehicle, here I reduce some emissions there. You might say, well, can I get rid of my second vehicle? That's a really difficult thing to do. Am I really willing to do that? And you might say, well, no, I'm not willing to do that, but I can get 100% electricity. And am I willing to get 100% natural electric heating? Not yet. That's like a hard thing to do, but you really should get the electric heat pump when it's time to replace your air conditioning unit. But not right now, I can't do that. So I might address my food. I might even have to get down to reducing my consumption of goods. and I finally get to my 40% below. So if you take this as a personal experience, it's very difficult to get people to make these changes. And we've had this carbon calculator online for about 15 years, and I've never really assumed that this is driving a lot of behavior change. To the extent that this tells you something new and surprising about something you didn't already know, about some action you're about to take, then information can change behavior. But it's not sufficient to change behavior in most cases. Here's our take action page. What is necessary to change behavior is to engage with your peers. And the best way to engage with your peers is working through your place of work. We've found through I've looked at every year, 400 abstracts. I'm in charge of reviewing those for the BECC conference over 11 years. And all these thousands of abstracts that I've reviewed, working from the middle out is the best way to engage people in behavior change. The great thing about organizations is that you have everybody's email, and you can enhance the corporate culture where you are, which has a lot of other spillover benefits into employee retention, and making people happier, making people potentially more productive in their workplaces. So these programs that we've reviewed over these many years at the BECC conference, they work so well that we don't even bring them up to the conference presentation very often, because they've got to do something new and unique. We know this works, and we know how to do it. So I've run 5 statewide behavior change programs, 3 involving cities and 2 involving universities. And I can tell you the university program is way more successful than engaging your neighbors, which you don't hardly ever see. And I also taught a class on this for 3 years, and I got a dissertation on this. I've written papers on that. So, and if I could take all that lessons that we've learned over all these years, just for this TED Talk-like webinar here, we could boil it down to these 20 bullet points. And if I could take these 20 bullet points and boil it down just to one thing, make it simple, fun, and social. Whatever you do, evaluate every aspect of your program. Is it making it easier? Is it fun? And is it social? And if it's not doing those things, and all 3 of those things, then and not doing them really well, then you really want to maybe rethink things. I'm going to go through a few behavioral strategies here, and I'm sorry I didn't set my timer, but I suspect I have maybe 5 minutes left here. So let me go through a few of these behavioral strategies here. First of all, it is really important as you start your program to understand your audience and try to tailor your program to that specific audience. And you may want to have different segments of your audience where you have different program elements. So when we engaged staff, student, and faculty across the University of California campuses, we had different kind of programs and messaging for students than we did for the staff, because they have different motivations. Now, it's also important to set goals and make sure that they're achievable goals, but also ambitious. There's a really wonderful study that showed if you give people a 5% energy reduction target, in this study, the participants reduced their energy consumption by 7%. And when they gave them a 20% reduction target, they reduced their energy consumption by 15%. So just giving them that different target had doubling of their energy reductions. Now, they didn't make the 20% target on average, but many of them did. And that was a very meaningful target for people. I'm going to go through just a few of these. You want to emphasize collaboration over competition, because what you're doing is helping to build that kind of that corporate culture, that making it feel good, within your group to achieve these goals. However, there can be some friendly competition. That's what we run, as competitions that really motivate people to make change. Feedback is really important. So there's a lot of things that we can do before people take an action, but if we motivate them to take that action and they do it and they don't get any positive feedback, it can be really disappointing. And really that's how sustainability is for the most part. You do a lot of work, nobody ever sees it, nobody even gives you any accolades or appreciation for doing it. So even just a thank you or a smiley face can make people feel like they're appreciated. Even if it's a software program who doesn't even know you, it gives you a little thank you and a smiley face, that can be really effective. And we give them points in our program, but we also give them positive messaging, through email and through their peer groups is really important. Comparative feedback is really important. That's really the basis of these challenges, which is what we've been working on. Now, social norms, we could talk, for a long time about social norms, but it boils down to two things primarily. One is a descriptive norm. So if you have if most people are already doing the right thing, emphasize that. Just telling people that this is what most people do, people want to fit in to do the right thing. The other is a injunctive norm, and this is a norm of what we think you should do or what your peers think you should be doing. So if, and this could be done through, just seeing your peers, recycling, and you kind of know that they expect you to recycle, but that belief in what others expect me to do is really, really powerful and motivating. So use that through your messaging and through, what the expectations are. Particularly in a workplace, it's a great place to get those across and to use those effectively. I'm going to go down quickly to number 12 here, which is, no, let's go to number 11 really quickly. So all of community-based social marketing really involves reducing barriers and increasing the motivations to take action. So one thing you might want to do when you're doing your research is talk to the people who already do this action and find out why they do it, what motivates them to do that, and then use that in your program. And another thing you can do is, of all the people who are not doing the action, why aren't they doing it? And how can you reduce barriers to make sure that it is meaningful for them? And kind of putting those people together can be a really effective way of getting that behavior more activated. Public commitments are really important. There's some really wonderful studies that show just getting people to make a public commitment, whether it's a sticker or an email or a lawn sign, it can change the way they think about themselves. It can be a really simple foot in the door to say, I've made this public commitment, that's who I am now. I care about whatever it is, protecting my neighborhood or my school or this particular issue. I have a rainbow flag in my neighborhood as an ally. I'm saying this is an issue that's important to me, and that changes my individual behavior. I now have a rainbow mask I wear around the neighborhood because maybe perhaps I've made that commitment. That's how I identify myself now, as somebody who supports that particular issue. So getting people to make that public commitment can get them to level up and do much more meaningful actions later. And then, I'm going to end on this one because this is a wonderful example, remembering the golden rule. This is from Robert Cialdini, who's a wonderful behavioral psychologist. And I think this is relevant for this talk. His example is when you go into a business meeting, say it's a party, one very common attitude would be, what can these people in this room do for me? The successful business person will say, what can I do for all of these people? And if you give and you can help others in a way that's non-committal, in a way that's simply genuine, and you're generally helping them, they feel an obligation to help you back. And it's not that you're expecting it, but they will feel it. If you invite someone to your party, they feel like an obligation to invite you to their party. If you help them in a way that's easy for you, then they are going to help you in a way that's easy for them and it's going to really benefit you, and the benefit could be much, much larger than that. So remembering that's the golden rule, but really remembering that in your program, you are there to help them. You are there to help your workers, help the business, do everything you can to help them and be successful, and ultimately that will come back to be successful for you. There's lots more that we could talk about in behavioral, persuasive messaging and so forth. But let's just go through how we did this with the Cool Campus Challenge, taking those lessons to build a program. It's really important if you design a program to develop a logic model. And in this case, you want to start with your expected outcomes. And we had 6 expected outcomes or goals. We wanted to activate, educate, motivate, empower individuals to take action. We wanted to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and build capacity in the organization to do this over and over again to get better and better and better at it. And so you pick metrics that you can use to judge how well you're doing to meet these particular goals. So activate was really easy. Just how many people did we sign up? Educate was, we developed videos and materials that we asked people to watch or to read. And in our program, it wasn't enough for us to say, okay, I watched this, check that box. We always had in our program, they had to fill out a little sentence, a little story about, with a story prompt. Each action had a little prompt. What did you learn from this video about whatever? How, you know, you recycled for a day. How did you overcome these barriers? You know, you make it really meaningful. And we were able to evaluate these educational kind of actions that people took, but also the stories that they told about what they learned. And that was really rewarding. Motivation was how many actions per person did they take? So signing them up is not enough. This is our main really metric here, is how many stories did we get? Not how many clicks, but actually how many stories did we get of people taking these actions? Empowerment is really important. This is kind of the theory behind this, is that individuals do not feel motivated to take action because they know that individually they cannot solve this huge problem. It creates this cognitive dissonance too, in that, you know, they know that they're part of the problem and yet they can't do anything about it. And so they maybe try to do a few things to kind of wash their hands of their guilt or something, but ultimately they know they're not doing something that's meaningful. However, you can make your business sustainable. You can make your peer group or your organization or your schools or even your community more sustainable. And when you get en masse, very successful program doing that, that is meaningful, that is rewarding. That's where businesses have the real opportunity to reduce emissions. And you do have to play the long game though. You do have to build capacity. And when you're applying each of these outcomes, you want to apply specific strategies, behavioral strategies, and outputs or project tasks that are going to lead you to achieve those particular goals. So every element of our program is based on some behavioral strategy. Some of those that I mentioned already. How are we going to use tailored feedback or social diffusion or social norms or descriptive norms or gamification techniques to get people to level up? How are we going to use these to achieve these specific actions? So should I close now?
I was going to say, let's do 1 minute warning. You're doing great though.
Thank you. So here's our program. It was a simple program to get people, this is the 5th year we've run a statewide program. We engaged 10 University of California campuses, staff, student, and faculty. We get them to share their stories. That was the main behavioral strategy here, that everybody does something, and just getting them to share what they do can help put those people who maybe are doing things they're not getting credit for or knowledge about it, get them to share what they're doing and get other people to see how they did it and maybe do the same thing. And so it's like a social feed, like an Instagram feed or a Twitter feed, where you go through, you take the actions, you upload a photo, you have a story prompt, you say whether or not you already do it, you upload your photo to this like Instagram-like feed, and you can see as you're going through the program, what people are doing in real time. You can go to their profile page and see the actions that they took. This is a student who got to the highest level, and then that unlocked an action to create her own video. Then you got people to like it and to comment on her video. You can create teams, for campuses, you've got your own campus pages. You kind of want to segment your population that way. Here's our final statistics. We had over 22,000 students in 4 weeks, students, staff, and faculty sign up for this program. That's 7% of all University of California population. And what's really meaningful for me is our level of motivation. So on average, we got 9 actions per person times 22,000 people. And it wasn't just click this box. It was, I had to do something to write a little story about what I did and share that and get feedback from others. We also work at the public policy and community level. One thing that you can do with these programs is include actions that make people, that allow people to take commitments for their own community and through public policy. That really is important for empowering people to feel like their individual and collective actions is leading up to something more meaningful. Our research suggests that over 1/3 of total reduction potential at community level, statewide, requires community level engagement, community level action from local governments and policy. So we have a program to provide data. We're doing greenhouse gas inventories for all California cities and counties, and building in these behavior-based programs and tools as well. So the city or the county sign up for this, they can engage with the behavior change tools as well.
All right. Any last point, Chris?
That's it. Yeah, I'm really excited to work with this group because there's so much potential here. There's so much, you have such wonderful people working already and engaged and ready to kind of work on this issue. So I hope that we can, maybe find a way to help you do that. And I'm really looking forward to our discussion that we've had previously on other calls, setting up for this workshop. We just couldn't stop. So let's get into that.
I know this is going to be a challenge because I can already see Dana and Katie nodding and making connections. And I hope a lot of you are having similar experiences as sustainability leaders and academics. We have a lot of different people on the call today with different intentions, right? But I'll give you a little anecdote. When I recently went to grad school, on my first day, Master's of Sustainable Development, my professor told us, you all are studying the wrong thing. You should all be studying psychology and human behavior because that is what sustainability ultimately comes down to. So I'm very excited for this discussion because as Chris already started, right, he's making connections between how some of these individual how we have to kind of change things at an individual level, but really that can't really be done unless it's from the middle, right, with an organizational strategy. So with that, we're going to turn to our panelists, and I'm going to, let's see, now I'm going to share my screen, and I want to introduce our panelists now more formally because I had to skip over that. So today we have with us Katie Excoffier and Dana Jennings. We're going to start with Katie, who is currently our board chair for BC3 and formerly sustainability manager at Genentech. Katie led the sustainability program at Genentech for the past 12 years, responsible for sustainability strategy, performance, and reporting. She also led the Green Genes, Genentech's 4,000 member employee engagement team, Green Team. She's newly retired from Genentech as of this past April, and she now serves as our board chair. She also has a BA in biology and an MS in genetics, a master's in genetics, I should say, and an MBA in sustainable business from Presidio Graduate School. We also have Dana Jennings, Senior Project Manager, Global Sustainability Workplace at LinkedIn. In her role, she drives progress towards LinkedIn's ambitious sustainability goals, which includes carbon negative, zero waste, and engaged employees across LinkedIn's 30+ global sites. One of her favorite parts of her job is overseeing the sustainability engagement program for employees, where she gets energized by the passion of her fellow colleagues. And she has a master's in environmental science and management from the Bren School at UC Santa Barbara. So with that, I'm actually going to start with Dana. And here we go. And I would love if you could just kind of kick us off by telling us more about yourself and the work you do and how it applies to employee engagement for sustainability.
Great, thanks, Leah. It's a pleasure to be here today. And as Leah covered in the introduction, my responsibility is really driving progress on our corporate goals. And a big piece of that is the employee component. So we can take care of some of it back of house, but we need everyone on board to fulfill our mission of driving progress on the goals and enhancing employee experience and culture. So this slide has some fun images of some of the employees engaging in Go Green activities around the world. And let's see. So yeah, so I think kind of jumping into some reflections I had while Chris was speaking, I think that it's really important to have that self-awareness of you and your neighborhood and your own carbon footprint, and then what that looks like for the people across the organization that you're trying to engage. So specifically, since our program is global, having one message or one call to action is not going to work, right? If someone sits in the South Bay of San Francisco, or they sit in Tokyo, or they sit in Dubai, what their footprint is, what they want to engage on, what the environmental issues are where they live is so different that we have to keep that perspective in mind. So I think just how Chris showed that snapshot of just San Francisco and how it varies, and then you take that global. So it's a super important lesson there. And yeah, one of the things that we did most recently was an eco challenge, which is very similar to what Chris shared for his campus competition. And we had really high levels of engagement. And I think one of the reasons for that was the desire for people to connect right now, given that we're all dispersed into our own homes. And that kind of aligns with what Chris was saying of having a shared objective. And so how can what I'm trying to achieve also achieve another goal? And so our HR and talent organization is looking for ways to help our employees stay connected and not feel alone during this really challenging time. So I think having an initiative right now that brings people together and that is fun and social and simple is particularly valuable. And we actually had more engagement this year virtually than we had in the previous year in person. And I think that goes to show that it's really important. So I went maybe off the what we were supposed to talk about, but those were things that I was writing down while Chris was speaking.
No, that's
So,
perfect. I appreciate the reflections. Yeah, that's
Mhm.
great. And we'll have more time for reflection too. But so Katie, I'm going to kick it over to you. And if you wouldn't mind, same thing, telling us a little bit more about the work you've done, and like Dana just did, reflect a little bit, you know, tie us back to the theme on employee engagement and behavior change.
Okay. Can you change the slide?
Yes.
Thank you. I cheated and did 2 slides. Oops. There we go. I tend to talk a lot, so like Chris, so I'll try to speed up here. I like showing this slide to give the overview of the sustainability program at Genentech. So as Leah said, I retired last month. A couple more days and I won't be able to say last month anymore. If I say we when I talk about Genentech, I'm just going to stop correcting myself. I'll just use the word we, but realize that it's we in the past tense. So this slide really shows the milestones along our sustainability journey, starting about 14 years ago when our sustainability program began from Green Jeans. So it all started, we didn't have a formal sustainability program. We started with a club of employees that wanted to get rid of styrofoam in the cafeteria, really. And it turned into a formal sustainability program when I arrived in about 2008, and we started setting goals and pulling together all the folks around campus that were doing great things already, great transportation program and things like that, and putting them into a sustainability council. So we've got a council that includes energy, water, waste, transportation, something called Green Biopharma, and Well Workplace, so healthy buildings. So we pull all those together into a council, and then we plug in the Green Jeans members to those professionals that are working on each of those things. And so you can see the breadth on this timeline of the things that we're involved with, but that Green Jeans and employees tie in a number of places. It's like really critical for our transportation goals, for example, to have employees choose the behavior of riding on the G-Ride buses rather than being in their own internal combustion car. So we need to encourage people to do things that will help us to meet our goals. The very last little icon on there, the Sustainable Development Goal picture there, is from 2019. Back in the day when we used to get together in person, we had a great Earth Month where we had 17 events for the 17 the Sustainable Development Goals. And besides having a fun event for each of those days, we also used it to educate employees about what Genentech's already doing on each of the SDGs and to solicit their ideas. We did a whole crowdsourcing thing where we solicited their ideas for each of the SDGs on each of those days. And then they're actually using the results of that whole brainstorming exercise to look at Genentech's next generation goals and seeing what ideas employees came up with. So that's my overall sustainability timeline for the period of time before I got there through now. So thank you, Leah. I put up the Green Jeans mission because I was reminded by Dana, she has 3 bullets and I have 3 bullets. And it really starts with education, a lot like what Chris was saying, with understanding your footprint and educating people. So we activate them, are those the words? Yeah, activate by getting people to sign up for Green Jeans, but then educate them through all of the educational opportunities that we offer them. And then the motivate part, that's the tricky part. I think we've spent more time on education in the past, and I think it's time to move more into the motivation part. We've dabbled in a few little competitive ideas and software things and haven't found anything yet that really sticks. But I'm super interested in the analogy of cool campus, yeah, the taking something that works at college campuses and applying it to a corporate campus. And you see I've got one bullet item there about fun. I think we added that in the second generation of the mission when we had tried to do things, we had tried to like force people into doing certain things, making, you know, agreeing to various things, being part of meetings, and we found we were losing people. And so we try to now make things more fun and meet people where they are. The little quotes on the side, since we didn't have a lot of ways to measure success, we measure our success mostly from surveys. And those are some of my favorite quotes that I go to if ever I'm depressed, to remember the difference that we're making in people's lives. We love the fact that somebody saw one of our movies about environmental impact of meat and became a vegan. We hear that a lot from people. That actually happened to me. A movie we showed at Game Changers, we showed at Green Jeans, and I made my husband watch it, and halfway through we said, okay, we're vegans. So we're keeping busy during the pandemic cooking things. Anyway, the second one is that we give away a Green Jeans mug during new hire orientation to everyone. And we just tell them this is to get you off to a good start. We have compostable cups, but it's better if you use these reusables. Reusables are greener than using disposables. And a lot of people keep doing that. And then my favorite one, because of the BC3 connection, is someone thanking Green Jeans for the SunShares program, which is a BC3 program. And it got them to install solar panels and buy an EV. So those are some of the things that I've been up to.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, it's really amazing the work that both of you have done. I saw Dana nodding her head a lot too, so I think she was relating to a lot of the things you were saying. But moving into our next question, I want to kind of talk a little bit more about the philosophies behind LinkedIn and also Genentech's approach to employee engagement. You know, for example, some business leaders would like to encourage employees to take certain action, which is something that you both have touched on, but some other companies maybe try to take more of a passive approach. So if you would mind just talking more about what it is the philosophy is and what's really kind of at the heart of it and why you take this approach. And Katie, we'll start with you if you wouldn't mind trying to keep it tight, and then we'll go to Dana. That'd be great.
Well, one thing that I found myself saying a lot was make it easy to do the right thing, rather than trying to force people into something or tell them what the right thing is to do. Educate them about the issue and then make it easy to do the right thing. And so our job was to set people up for success. And an example of that would be we tried Meatless Monday. We tried getting rid of all meat in the cafeterias on Mondays, and it was a disaster. People hated it. And so we went to something called Green Mondays, which is just having more plant-based options and more communications and taste tests and things like that during on Mondays. So every Monday they do that. And that works much better. Same applies to EVs, for example. So teach people about EVs. We've had lunch and learns from almost every car manufacturer. We've had ride and drive events. We have discounts, and then we put in EV chargers. So we don't tell people to buy an EV, but if they want to buy an EV, we want to be there to support them and make it easier for them to do that. And waste is the most important one, where people's behavior around food waste, you know, how you avoid food waste, what you do with unwanted food afterwards, and how to recycle properly. It requires constant vigilance and tweaking of strategies to get people to avoid waste. And it's so visible to people. People are always saying, there's so much extra food here. And it really upsets people, even people that are not green Green Genes members, and they want solutions, they want help. And so we try to be there to help rather than being the one that says, you are doing, you're bad, you know. So that's kind of our strategy: educate and then make it easy to do the right thing.
That sounds very powerful still. I'm also going to stop sharing my screen so we can focus on the people talking.
Thank you.
So Dana, would you mind going next? And then Chris, I have another question for you, but we'll go with Dana first.
Great. So at LinkedIn, we always say talent is our #1 operating priority. And so it's all about the employees, and that spans all of our programs. It's employee first focused. So when we launched our Go Green sustainability program, that was one of the top 3 pillars, was that it enhanced the employee experience. And so I think that's just kept us front and center. And in terms of success and kind of where the leadership team wants to take us, the big thing for us was plugging into these great culture programs that we already had at LinkedIn. So in that sense, it was a benefit to our program. So an example is 1 day a month, we have an in day, which is a day that employees have kind of back to them that they can give back to themselves or to the community or to the broader world. And there's a theme. And so we have an environment in day, and that's kind of our big April. It's our big moment every year. And so we work with that team to make it a success. So it's a success for us, and it's a success for the team that runs the employee experience. And similarly, we really focus on partnerships with other employee culture groups. So a great example would be some of our diversity teams, and partnering with, like we call Women at LinkedIn, on, you know, zero waste at home workshops, things that maybe match that group a little bit more. We also partner with, you know, like OLA, our Hispanic Alliance, on certain issues that correspond, maybe environmental justice issues. So we really try to plug into other environmental group or other diversity or groups within LinkedIn. And I think that's been a really great way to achieve common goals at the company and have buy-in. So not always reinventing the wheel and focusing exclusively on our own thing, but making it a broader win across the organization.
Thank you for sharing that. Very important strategy. I think plugging into those networks and getting all of that buy-in really helps make your job easier and makes the whole thing feel more organic and authentic anyway. So Chris, I want to go to you, and I'd love for you to chime in here, kind of from your perspective and your experience. Like, how have you seen corporate leaders, you know, reflecting on what Katie and Dana said, of course, and then also what has the theme been like from the corporate sector? Is this something that people are really embracing in terms of employee engagement, or something that corporate, like especially in the Bay Area, people need to be doing more of or rethinking? So I would love your thoughts and input here.
Well, the best fit, of course, is when the corporate culture already values environment, and many companies have that really front and center. And in most cases, it is about the employees. So making the employees more comfortable, making them feel like they're doing something meaningful. You know, all companies have an environmental impact as well. That goes both ways. It's not just a negative impact. They can also have a positive impact through what they're doing. So yeah, I think in terms of engaging the leadership, it's about employee retention, making employees feel, good about the work that they're doing, enhancing the corporate culture, and maybe even making them more productive. And I really liked what Katie said also about kind of providing these programs that kind of make it easier for them to do the right thing. And also what Dana was saying, it's really making it employee focused. It's kind of like the golden rule. You're making their lives better. So they're going to make your lives better. They're going to probably help maybe do some of the things that you want them to do as well. But from the corporate side, it is about ultimately about enhancing the workplace culture, making the employees feel better, employee retention, and also employee recruitment as well. And those are, the spillover effects that can be much, much greater than, just the benefit of the greenhouse gas reductions or whatever. Maybe they're saving energy in the building, and you might want to do the cost benefit analysis just on, well, are they reducing energy? Is it cost effective? It has all these other benefits which are much, much greater. Something else I'll say about cost effectiveness. there is, there is this kind of sweet spot where if a program is underfunded, it's not going to be really effective, and you can kind of like, squeeze the most benefit out of a program that's just kind of like a little bit not overly funded, and then you kind of get a program that's kind of overfunded. But sometimes those programs that are even kind of beyond that sweet spot where you're really squeezing everything out of it are ultimately the programs that are going to have the greatest benefits. We found this really with the Cool Campus Challenge. So our first year we did this in 2015, we were really squeezing a lot of benefit out of really little amount of money. And then we had about $100,000 to run this whole program, the software and the outreach and everything. And then we went to $400,000 the last time we did it. The $400,000 program, was not as cost effective, but it was more effective overall. And so if what you're really concerned about is having the greatest impact, and you're not just worrying about, a few of those metrics, then you might want to do something a little bigger. Whatever you do, do it really, really well. It focus on a few things, do them really well, then it's really motivating, it's really empowering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a great tip. Thank you for that perspective and reflection, Chris. So we're gonna move, this is the last question before we move into some Q&A. And I apologize for the only 1 hour webinar. I know there's so much we can dig into here. But we're going to start with Dana. And I'm curious, in the midst of this public health crisis, the very nature of what we consider engagement is changing significantly. And I know you experienced this in April with the revision of your Eco Challenge. So what ripple effects have you already seen and felt in your role and in the work you do? And are there ways that we can kind of all embrace this new virtual engagement? So we'll start with Dana.
Yeah, great question. And like I spoke to earlier, I think it's actually enhancing the importance of the program. That's been my experience, because it provides a connection and a way for people to work together. And a few things that we saw, excuse the background noise, I'm one of the working parents with little ones home. So a couple things that we saw in April that really jumped out of me that I wanted to share. One was just the sheer creativity that came forth when people were forced to go virtual. So we had our Environment In Day. We had over 120 different events happening around the world virtually that are run in a pretty dispersed way. And it wasn't just, the webinar, the panelists, even the zero waste cooking. One of my favorite ones was an environmental haiku competition. It was just breathtaking. People submitting a picture in a haiku. There were scavenger hunts of sustainable replacement. So it was like pick something and then go in your house and find what you're using that might be better for the environment. And bingo. I mean, I'm talking like so creative, so fun, and ways people could engage. We had movies that you just had a code. You could, like a working mom, you could watch it over the weekend with your kids. Because I think a lot of people right now, like myself, are strained for time and focus time. We have less time because of children, and the time we have, it's now all our meeting calls, and so it's hard to add extra stuff. So making whatever the activity or ask is be something people can do at a different time that works for them is really key. And then I did want to touch on the fact that it does sort of increase access to different people. So people who weren't showing up for our in-person events have been on virtual events, and that's amazing. I don't know why, but that's just how it's working for them. And we also had a lot of positive feedback because people have been able to attend events in different regions of the world and meet new people, and that it was never possible before. So myself, I was on New York stuff, and you could call into London stuff, and you can meet your coworkers from around the world and check out and see what they're doing in their region. And so those were all wins that we've had from virtual engagement. It's been super fun to see how it's taken off.
I love hearing about how it's making things more accessible and providing actually more opportunities for connection. So Katie, I'm going to go to you, and then we'll end with Chris.
Okay. So Dana has a great idea there about how people that are in different places can connect. So my scope for Green Jeans and the remaining teams really very focused on our South San Francisco campus, but there are a couple other small campuses and satellite people, salespeople, a couple thousand salespeople all over the country. And they always feel left out because we're so focused on in-person stuff. And so I think, I don't know if the team has done this, they should really reach out to those other forgotten folks and let them know that they can now participate in the same way. We would do WebExes or Google Hangouts, Google Meets sometimes, but it was always a different kind of experience. Now everybody's kind of on the same page, which is nice. So what they did for Earth Month, we did do a movie, but instead of a link, Erin came up with the idea of doing a Netflix party. So we all watched at the same time and chatted. Netflix parties have a build. We were sure it wasn't going to work, but it did. You can talk about what you're seeing in the movie. So it was a nature movie and people were just chatting away during the movie and it was super fun. We also did an iNaturalist thing where we told people to go out into their neighborhood and post pictures. And then very relevant to COVID, Jeannie ran a jam board brainstorming kind of session about COVID, building back better after COVID, opportunities for how we get back to work and how we use what we've learned during the pandemic to be better. And we'd never used that Jamboard tool before, and it was pretty cool. So a lot of little tweaks on the kinds of things we generally do anyway. People are getting kind of burnt out on Zoom, I think, but it's, so you got to keep it fresh and keep doing new things. But it seems to be, getting to, more access is one of the silver linings, I think, more access to more people.
Thank you, Katie. And Chris, I apologize, but we have to move on. So if you have anything really burning about virtual engagement, if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat for everybody, just so that we have time for at least one question. So Maura, I'm going to kick it over to you in just a second here. I also just want to make sure people know that we have this public tool available for folks. It's called the MyClimate Action Plan. It is on Trello, thanks to a collaboration with one of our members, Atlassian, and it does feature Chris's carbon footprint calculator here. And it's a way for you to, think about behavior change and encourage people to set their own goals around climate action. Please check it out. I will send the link as a follow-up. And of course, we have a couple other publicly available options, which I will send via email as a follow-up here. But if you are interested in learning more about BC3 and becoming a member, we have additional support we can offer if you do come into our network and help collaborate with our members. So Maura, tell us at least one question from the Q&A. And sorry, everyone, I knew this would be juicy, so sorry we're running out of time.
Great. This is such a great discussion. Thank you, everyone. A couple quick things. We will be sending out a video of this presentation afterwards, so stay tuned if you want to watch it again. And please do, if you have additional questions, you can type them into the Q&A section, and if some of the panelists can answer them perhaps after, or I can help. But I'm just going to pick out two quick ones. In terms of someone had a good question on any literature that on employee engagement related to sustainability that people would recommend. And I'm going to propose that the panelists and all the participants chat into the chat stream links to good literature. So I have one that I'll pop in there in a second. It's called Green Wisdom. It's one of the ones I know of. That second from that, we had a good question here from the group. And so Leah or the panelists, you guys, maybe one of you answer this, or if there's time. So the question is, how should corporations think about encouraging pro-environmental behavior change, not just within their own company, but across their industry or across their customers or across their partners? So I think that's a great question. So how do you even get outside the bubble of your company and influence your industry or customers? Who wants to take that?
I can take
Katie,
a
you're on
first
mute.
stab
Yeah,
if you
Dana,
want,
we
because
didn't
that's
hear you.
actually part of our strategy is to go beyond our four walls. And I think we're uniquely poised to do that because we are a social network. And so we have great tools to do that. So I think from a vendor standpoint, it's really a bit more formal, working with the procurement team to implement sustainable targets in contracts. For example, starting to request and require CDP reporting from key vendors, or zero waste packaging, things like that. For customers, I think we're working more through an example standpoint, so sharing how we're using our platform in ways to highlight sustainability, and then that can be kind of used more broadly. And then we have LinkedIn Learning, which is a platform for our members for education. And so we have some courses, one I'll put into the chat that could be really of interest, about an employee's guide to sustainability. So we're lucky because we have those ways to plug in that make sense. I know it could be more challenging for a different kind of organization.
Yeah, if you could pop those links in the chat, that would be great, and we'll send them as a follow-up too. Katie, you wanna go, and then we'll end with Chris?
I just think that's a very timely question, because everybody's talking about expanding to the scope of sustainability goals to include scope 3. So looking at your vendors, and as Dana said. So I think that's something that companies have to start thinking more about. Is we've all greened up within our walls, and now we've got to spread that wider.
Yeah, I mean, I would just second everything, or third everything that they've been saying. Certainly corporate sustainability, or doing this, the corporate sustainability reports is basically essential. And so having that norm, that descriptive norm of this is what we all do, we're all expected to do this, and then to set goals, have the industry set goals that are meaningful and achievable, and have them be accountable for what they're doing through their sustainability reporting. I think you could do that certainly through industry programs. And, ultimately, it's about the corporate culture. And so some industries will lend themselves really well because they're already an industry that, has a lot of benefit, and others is going to be much more of a struggle. The leadership is going to be more of a struggle. Even, belief in climate change could even be a challenge in some. So I think it does need to be, you have to build capacity to engage in whatever you're doing, get really good at your strategies, develop those strategies, pilot them, test them, see what works, and just keep working at it.
I think that's a really great way to bring us home. And Chris, would you mind? I really want to end with the fun. What is it? Fun, simple, and social. Is that fun?
Simple, fun, and social just is a little easier to say for me. Simple,
Okay.
fun, and social.
I just start with fun.
In our lives, that's a lesson we could learn too. I don't know.
Yes. So if you have one takeaway from this whirlwind of amazing content and conversation, I would say that that's it. I really want to thank the panelists for joining us and trying to cram in so much of their, professional work and life's work, in Chris's case, into such a short amount of time. I really hope we can do some follow-up conversations, maybe even with a bigger audience. And for those of you that joined, thank you so much. Like I mentioned earlier, please let us know in the Q&A box if you would like to connect with BC3 further, or in the chat box. We'll be checking both of those. My email is here as well if you'd like to talk about employee engagement in terms of what BC3 does. And again, just thank you all so much. Happy Friday, whatever that means to anyone anymore. I hope you find some time to indulge in at least not working this weekend, and hopefully we've given you some food for thought. So thank you all so much. And once again, just have a good weekend, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Hi,
Bye.
thanks. Thanks, Leah.
Have a good weekend.